If you are looking for success, you will go on that journey on your own. But you want to know the failures. Like a lot of the youth today, they don't care how successful you are. What they care is what are the struggles that get you there. What's the failures that you went through and how do you overcome those failures?
Is redefining what it means to be successful in Singapore easier said than done? Is it even possible? And what does the new Singapore dream look like beyond the 5 Cs? Welcome back to The Usual Place, and I'm your host, Natasha. Now, before we get started, if this is your first time watching or listening to the show, do like and subscribe so that you can get notified when we drop new content. Now, before we dive into the topic for today, let me introduce my guests who are on the couch with me today. Now, first up, I have Minister of State Alvin Tan. Thank you for being with me. And we also have Sheila Manokaran, who is the co-founder of River Valley Irregulars, which is a platform that connects youth with their calling. Yes. And next to her on the couch is Clarence Ching from social mobility charity Access Singapore that provides career exposure opportunities for disadvantaged students. That's a lot.
Indeed.
And I'm sure you'll bring up examples from the kids that you work with.
Certainly will.
Okay, so let's dive into what we're talking about today. Well, thank you very much for being on the couch with me. And I just wanted y'all to come by and talk to me about how we're going to redefine success in Singapore, because this is a conversation that's come up in the last couple of months, led by Prime Minister Lawrence Wong, right? And I want to ask, can we do it? Because for the longest time, the 5 Cs represented the template for being successful in Singapore. Like, it was just the general one that we all looked at, right? So this is how we viewed success in Singapore for the longest time. So why is this reset coming now? Or is it necessary? Like, what are your thoughts? Maybe we can start with you, Alvin.
Yeah, well, it's wonderful to be here, Natasha, and Sheila as well as Clarence. I've known for some time now, and the amazing work that they're doing, both on social mobility as well as empowering youths. The work that they're doing is not just in terms of redefining success amongst youth, but also amongst our students. And I'm sure you hear a lot when you interact with students. For example, I work a lot with Access, and then with Sheila on NYC, and we talk to youths all the time. And one particular thing stands out, that youths particularly want purpose as well as meaning in their work, in their vocation that they are being called to.
So are you saying they're no longer driven by the traditional route, which is like, go to school, get a degree, get that job, and then move up the corporate ladder? When you say they want to follow their calling, what does that mean? Yeah,
I think it's not mutually exclusive, because you can still pursue excellence and you can pursue a particular pathway, and now we're widening those pathways. But you can also choose, as you embark on these pathways, to find a job, a vocation, a calling that is both purposeful and meaningful.
I think I kind of like understand where this is also, like, I think for me, when I was part of growing up and like being through the education system, there was always a streaming and there's grading. And I think that was what broke me, in the sense where, you kind of like felt like you always have to get into a better stream. But I think today, where the playing field has opened up and given the youth the opportunity to decide, it's not just about trying to get into a stream, but it's about what you're passionate about. Where's your voice? Are you being heard? What are the things that to give you the space to learn the skills that you are really interested in, rather than you just feeling like you need to get that score. So it really kind of like the work that we do, especially in RVI today, it's about giving the youth the voice. And telling them that, hey, there's all these other opportunities. You don't have to feel like you just have to fit into one mold. And I think...
So if they don't make it in the maybe academic route, there's other areas that they can succeed in.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
So in Access, we did a social mobility survey back in 2023. And what we realized is that the majority of youths actually want to prioritize happiness and health, which is interesting.
It's very different from like the older generation, I would think.
It is, because back then, we were very prescribed to the 5 Cs. So back then, it was a lot of 5 Cs, we got to follow it, and that's the way to achieve the Singapore dream. But now you have the newer generations that says, hey, are the 5 Cs really that important? So you have folks like, Straits Times has covered it quite extensively, folks that join as hawkers, folks that decide to transition from being a lawyer to a bus driver. There are stories like this. But I think the biggest challenge now is how do we then help students from disadvantaged backgrounds aspire to be more? So I think there's a lot more that government can do. But of course, it's moving. I think Prime Minister has made it very clear in National Day rally that he wants to equalize opportunities. I think we see that with GP, we see that with subject-based banding back when Minister Ong was Education Minister.
Correct.
But the big question is, how do we then move systemically? So, for example, the public service, right? You do still subscribe to the notion of public scholarships, your PSC scholars coming traditionally from better schools.
Yeah.
How do we then move as we move the times? I think that's what the government needs to move more towards.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, first of all, if you look at our backgrounds, both Clarence, Sheila, myself, we took quite unconventional paths. I know Clarence's story very well, and that's what spurred him, his experience, going to Polytechnic, and excelling there, and then that's what drove him to set up Access. And of course, Sheila, at ITE. And myself, I repeated a year in school. I couldn't get into local universities, and we found our pathways. And so I think at the very base, what we want to do is we want to have and create an equality of opportunities. That means regardless of where you come from and where in life you probably have meandered, right? There are still alternative pathways for you to achieve and also to pursue. In the past, I think in our parents' time, because of where Singapore was in our development journey, there is, of course, a natural inclination towards achieving growth, success, material success. I think those are still very important because you need to be competitive, you need to be relevant to the world. But I think we are at a base now where we've achieved a certain level of standards of living. And it's very, very healthy, I think that we are also aspiring towards purpose, meaning, health, happiness. These are all very, very good metrics.
Speaking with youth, besides happiness, what else do they want to see on their success plate, I guess? Like, are there some common themes that are coming up with the young people that you're speaking with?
Well, both Sheila and Clarence can share, but from the National Youth Council surveys, it's pretty clear. They want really meaningful, purposeful jobs where they can make an impact in society. And really coming back to both Sheila and Clarence, these are youths who have set up organizations that make a very meaningful impact. But you can do it also in the private sector. And I think many of them have also tried to find roles, companies that have that purpose. It could be a purpose in terms of maybe sustainability or maybe creating jobs that can enhance somebody's well-being or economic status. So you don't necessarily have to be in the public sector. You can be in the youth sector organizations like the ones that you created, or you can be in the private sector. But I think they're a little bit more picky now to choose organizations that reflect as well as adhere to and align with their purpose and their meaning.
I think one challenge, and MOS Alvin brought up a very good point about going to the private sector. I think one of the big movements and momentum really has to come from the whole of society, which actually a part of it's corporate companies. Why I say that? It's because, for example, the government is working towards how do we then equalize opportunities between non-graduates and graduates, as one example.
That's right.
Is the gap very big?
I think so.
Still very big.
So because of the salary expectations, there needs to be a reference point that bosses check for your salaries and also trajectory opportunities. But I think if you look at countries like the UK, for example, they're really big on apprenticeships. Then, for example, in BP, if you do well during the apprenticeship program, within 1 year, if you do well, they will accelerate you to join their management associate program. So there are progressive programs available out there, which I think Singapore firms can learn from. And I think we need to start looking at other providers and not just the government taking a step forward. So for example, how can companies look beyond grades? Like even if you're a non-graduate, right? How can you be part of the workforce? And yes, sure, you may take a longer time, but you then have trajectory and you get to where you want to be in terms of your career growth and where you want to be in
like
terms of happiness.
Personally, right?
Yes. So I think that really is something that we have to work towards in the 5-10 years if we are to be serious about taking it the next step forward. I think Prime Minister made it very clear. I think society has to move forward along with his vision as well.
I guess going back to my first question about like, why are we having this conversation now? Is it because young people have explicitly expressed this? I mean, when you guys work with young people, right?
They are still young.
You're young people who work with young people, so your peers. What are some of the stumbling blocks that they might face in trying to achieve their version of success in today's Singapore? I mean, what are they saying to you guys?
I think a lot of the voice on the ground is that, you know, being overburdened in the work, like trying to be able to define what success looks like. So a lot of time when you get out of school, immediately you want to join like the big companies, you want to get there. And then eventually when they get in, then they realize that the impact that they're trying to make is not as meaningful or loud as they thought it would be. And that's where they go through, we don't call it midlife crisis, but we call
existential crisis.
Existential crisis.
At 21.
At 21, they're like, oh my gosh, Sheila, why are you doing this? And like, how do you feel? How do you wake up every day and feel so pumped up about like going to work while I'm trying so hard to get out of bed because I don't want to deal with the computer screens and like, I'm so done, there's no physical real impact, you know? So it kind of like, and that's where I always try to bring, you know, the youth together and tell them, hey, you know, tell your story. Like, because the youth needs to understand what you're going through is the life feelings and it's expectations that you set upon yourself, right? And that's how you want to give back to the next generation because they need to understand why these voices matters. So I think if you look at it on the ground, other than the expectation of what reality looks like, there is also the other half where, you know, if you have older parents, right? Like where you need to be able to provide for them, and you're stuck in that generation where you are the next person in the line to make sure everything works out, and then you have to balance that, and then you talk about trying to get, you know, into a relationship, trying to get a house, and then there's so much things, and I think as a youth we then go through that part where, do we really want to start a family? Do we really want to go there? Shall we just settle career and I'll look out for the people around us first before we go into the next step? So there's a lot of voices when a lot of my friends and youth come together. There's like, first, we need to get our career right. We need to be able to do something that we are passionate about. And then now a lot of them are also looking across Southeast Asia where they are like, how can I, with the skills and the education I have, how can I be able to also provide out there in Southeast Asia? What does that look like? So half of my friends from uni actually moved across Southeast Asia to start their businesses, to be able to do that. And we run programs with them across. So we tell them, we bring Singaporean youth over and tell them, hey, look, these are Singaporeans who have moved out, but at the same time, they're still creating impact onto the world. But it doesn't mean that they don't want to come back. It's just that they are trying to build their own say, like I guess their importance of what's passionate about for them. Yeah. So this is something.
Incredible.
Yeah.
You're going to say?
Yes, I'm just so encouraged to hear what Sheila has mentioned. I think I've worked, before joining government, I've worked a lot in the private sector. Actually, most of my career is in the private sector. And I spent a lot of time in Southeast Asia. And Southeast Asia is it's 680 million people.
Yeah.
You just came back from
Philippines.
From Manila, Makati. I spent a lot of time there as well. There's an energy.
Yeah.
There's an energy in Makati. There's an energy in Ho Chi Minh. There's an energy in Jakarta.
Yeah.
And I think in Singapore, we are so blessed to be able to be in the center of a thriving and growing Southeast Asia. And for us to also have our workforce, which is so well prepared to go out there.
Yeah.
Sometimes I think we are a little bit too comfortable. We want to be in Singapore.
Yeah.
But actually, if you go down, to Jakarta or Surabaya or Bandung or KL, there's a lot of opportunity.
Yeah.
And we know many of our youths, our young entrepreneurs, they're out there. They're building businesses. And I think there is something quite special about both the Singapore brand as well as Singapore youths who are making their mark overseas. And I think that's something that we must treasure. But at the baseline, we must give them all the necessary preparation to be able to go out there to venture. For us, we provide a lot of support for our entrepreneurs, but also for people who are going up the education ladder. So your basic building blocks for you to then take that step. But you must take that step.
So I have a question about young people today. Like, how did we move away from what our parents wanted? Like, why did we just not follow, like, okay, I just get the car, the condo, maybe not the country club. Like, what are you doing in a country club? I don't know. But
Already a country.
There's so much now, Active SG and everything. We have a lot.
Okay.
Yeah. So you don't really need a country club.
Yeah, you don't really, exactly. It's like
Active SG is
sell it. Actually. But why do you think young people think differently these days? Like, in this way, like, what influenced it, and particularly in Singapore, like, what changed?
I think, as generations, we pass through different generations, and now, we have the Gen Zs and the Gen Alphas. I think the priority really is well-being. A lot of it, right? It's well-being, and of course, you see that there is that movement around improving well-being, right? And I think it's really a lot about what drives you, what's your passion.
It's no longer about the money.
Yeah.
Money doesn't make you happy.
Yeah, it's more of like, what can I do even with so much money?
Right.
Right? What can I do when I grow old and I pass on? Right?
They don't just want to exist and go through the rat race and then be done, right? They want to, they like what you're saying, they want to follow their passion and make impact on
Yes.
society. And that's really interesting to me because it's a kind of like an interesting way of like, what does my life mean if I'm doing something to help someone else, right? Yeah.
So I mean, it's like Sheila and myself, right? For her, we were very Irregulars. For myself, Access. Not conforming with the notion of going to corporate life, which is very alluring, right?
Yeah.
The money and all that.
I mean, we could have just done it, but we chose different.
Yeah, we chose, and it's very difficult, right? Starting something, bringing a team together, building something up from scratch. It is challenging, but
Living
I think
paycheck to paycheck.
yeah,
right?
unfortunately,
The iron
that's
rice bowl of others, and you're like afraid.
Yeah.
But I think it's more of the impact that we could create. For us, it's really the youth that we work with. For Sheila, also the youth in a similar space.
Yeah.
So I think it's more of what do you then decide to prioritize? And the youngsters say, I want to prioritize things I'm very passionate about. And that's why you have folks coming on to do sports, thinking of doing it professionally. Right? And esports as well. So I think there is that change, that shift in mentality. And with the Gen Alphas, I think it's just an extension of that.
Okay.
Yeah. I think to answer your question, Natasha, I think the fact is that why do we not follow what our parents went through? The matter of fact is that we've seen how they have suffered. Like, I guess the pain they have put us, I mean, not put us through, but like they went through to put us where we are today. And then if we look back at like how they, sacrifice a lot of their time, the effort to be able to give us, good food, put us to school, we want to be able to also then understand if they had the opportunity we had, what would they have done different? Okay. Like, I think my parents might have just, started the business, being entrepreneurs themselves, but because they felt like, going through a normal job with paycheck to paycheck would help, survive.
Easier for the kids.
Yeah.
What do your parents do?
So it's very interesting. My parents, they went through, and my dad used to be a bouncer in the red light district areas.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so it's very interesting.
Got stories.
Yes. And my mom used to be she used to do like a travel agency and whatnot. But they both met in the nightlight industry because both their businesses
You got
were.
party parents.
Yeah, I got party parents. So I grew up understanding how that looked like.
Okay.
But I also understand like the sacrifices because they had to work at night. I only see them in the day, like for a very short period because they go back to sleep.
Yeah.
And that was like my whole life. And that's how I knew the industry. But the matter of fact is that if I could have done something different, would that be that or would that be different, right? Like, but I guess to me is that, like today, if you look around and you see all our parents, we want to have that life that we feel there's a meaning to it. And I think
rather than just working to put food on the table.
Correct. Yeah. So I think to us is that this is the risk that we are willing to take, and because we have all the resources that Singapore has given us, like the education, the skills, we are more confident that we can make it.
How realistic is that to chase your passion, to go down an alternative route? Because what our parents did put food on the table, but now we want to impact society, we want to be passionate about what we do. So how realistic is it actually?
That's the part, right? Expectations of reality, right? So to me is that I think the fact is that putting food to the table is another thing. Having passion and impact is also like another landscape on its own. But the question is that I ask myself if I one day have to leave this job and do something else, will I be ready for that? The matter of fact that, am I ready for a new challenge? And I think with the experience and the difficulty of our industry, the ups and downs, we are put through those hard-built sets of skills that will take us to the next step. So it enables us for more opportunities, but not to the extent where if we are doing the work and we don't see the impact, then we should question ourselves, why are we doing it? So
maybe I'll just add, I think there are three ways really how people pursue passion. One is your full-time job is your passion, right? You are in a sector that you really want to grow. So agriculture, for example, sustainability. The second way is you do a side hustle. You side hustle and then you like join different volunteer groups, National Council, whatever. The third one really is like Sheila and I, we start our own thing.
Yeah.
Which then you need to have two things. You need to really have a lot of grit.
Yeah.
Because when there's no cash, for example, the reality hits, right? You can't put food on the table.
Yeah.
And you really have to be creative in making money and think up new ideas.
Yeah.
So it is tough. So I guess
tough,
if I
yeah.
can sum it up, really, it's three ways of really pursuing
Looking
our
at it,
passion.
yeah.
It's useful to take a step back and just go back generations. Because the reason why we are able to talk about what the definitions of success are today is because our parents' generation, as Sheila so eloquently put through, and our grandparents' generation, they had to eke out a living. I mean, right now we have opportunities that were unbeknownst to them. Like my grandfather, cleaned the toilets at Raffles Hotel, for example, coming from China. My grandmother was she was the maidservant for a British family, right? And then later on, you had to literally put food on the table for my mom, for example, and her siblings. And my mom was smart, but my grandmother didn't have money for her to go to university. So she said, okay, your brothers should, because they are men, give that money to the brothers. Yeah.
Right.
So it's very different, very, very, very different times. But because of those generations where, our grandparents, and I think our parents, my parents didn't go to university, both of them, right? But I don't quite think that they would say, oh, what's my passion?
Yeah.
Right? They was like, my passion is to make the toilet cleaner. Or my passion is to make sure that, I put food on the table for the British family that I'm serving. I think in that moment where Singapore was at its very early days of growing and developing, where you didn't quite have that luxury, that was quite clear. We've come from overseas, we've come to Singapore, we want to make a living, and we want to provide food on the table. And that's why I think a lot of us have such respect for them, because they've built this foundation for us. Therefore, we can now think about higher order things. And I think that's something which I'm so glad that many of, our youth don't forget. So now we come to the higher order things. I think it's not quite mutually exclusive. As Clarence mentioned, and every time we talked about access, for example, there is always that need to be sustainable, right? You need to always have a product. I know I put on my commercial hat here, he always knows this. But even if you are in the social sector, you need to have a product and service that the so-called market wants, right? You can't produce something and then expect somebody to just pay you just because you have a nice smile. Well, some jobs do that, but you need to produce something of worth. So RVI, for example, Access, they need to have a mission, and it needs to make an impact, and people want to pay you for it, or in terms of a charity that they will devote funds to make sure that you can then achieve that social impact. So I think those are incredibly important. For us in government, I think later on to what Clarence mentioned earlier on, we are now availing different pathways. Whether it be arts, be it sports. If you look at what PM mentioned during NDR, Kallang Alive, it's just situating a sports district in a prime area in Singapore and bringing our sports school there. We have for art spaces where we're creating, for example, in my district in Kampong Java. So we're availing and we're providing funding, spaces, and also career opportunities in new areas like sports and arts and the creative fields. Even for esports, I help to look after esports. In Singapore, we brought in the Olympic Esports Week, and Gamescom is coming next in October. And I meet with a lot of young Singaporean developers. They work in places like Ubisoft, for example. Those jobs didn't happen before. But they are now, for example, they are creating the realistic worlds of Assassin's Creed, for example. So there are many new jobs, many new opportunities for our youth that hitherto were not available in our parents' time or our grandparents' time.
Okay. So when we redefine success of chasing what you want to believe in, this is your passion, will it lead to a generation that's less driven and more complacent, do you think? Like they're like, I want to do what I want to do versus say chase the traditional route. What's your thoughts?
I would hope that we don't lose our spark, and we don't lose our fire, and we don't lose our ability to work hard and achieve something. Just the other day, I mean, again, we meet with youths all the time. There are youths, like the both of you who see that passion, have that passion, and want to do something. But I still remembered a youth who I was speaking to a couple of weeks ago. I think I mentioned this to you, Clarence. And he said, "What is the government doing to ensure I have a job?" So I was like, okay. I'm
stressed
like,
already.
No, I'm like, I think it's dangerous to say that because I think the worst thing that we can do as government or as any of us even who care for our country or our youth is to provide a fail-safe environment, mollycoddle them, and protect them. You can't do that. In fact, you do a huge disservice to anyone if you say, "Oh, we just mollycoddle you, we'll give you the job, we'll give you a home, we'll give you everything," without having to work hard for it. And then, because in the real world, there's no such thing.
Yeah.
You have to go out there. In my own career, I have to go out, I have to compete with other people who also want that job as much as I do. What can I do to stand out? How can I make myself competitive, resilient, rugged, as we mentioned earlier on, but also relevant to the world? And how can we create businesses or products and services that are also relevant to the world? So if we don't do this properly, if we lose our edge in a very competitive world, I think we would then reverse and go back to the times of our parents and even grandparents if we're not careful.
Yeah.
Because we've seen countries actually take steps back very quickly. So it's not something that we could take for granted, and we ought to.
Yeah, Clarence, you're going to say?
The challenge in the business that Sheila and I do, things like me, it's really about how we empower disadvantaged students, but actually a lot of them decide not to take forward. And I think that is the disappointing
What do you mean? So
part.
they just decide not to?
Yeah, so because in our business, so for Access, for example, we provide mentorship opportunities, we provide different types of ways to engage disadvantaged youth in the career space. So we think of us as a middleman between schools and companies. We help students, we bring the students to corporates run programs. But in a lot of situations, after the program, students forget about it and then they just move on, right? So it's really like Starfish Theory, right?
Yeah.
I mean, essentially, we try our best to pick up all the starfishes. But unfortunately, because in the business we are in, it is challenging to pick up all the starfishes, and some of them don't follow up, for example. And I think there's a natural elimination process in some sense.
So
Students
the people who want it will really
will
like
really
go
want it.
for it.
So
And they're
they'll
like,
reach
I'm
out to
serious
us.
about my
Yeah.
own success and
Yeah.
defining it the way I want to.
Yeah, no, and we get lots of inquiries from students to say that, can we continue the journey with you? And we want to work with these students. But there are students that decide, I have this great opportunity, but thank you, but no thank you. Yeah, the hungry ones really go for it. Right? A rugged society, that's what we really want to achieve.
Okay.
So it is disappointing. When we started, we really wanted to empower every single individual. But after a while, you realize you cannot do that. You will lead yourself to burnout because you really want to force the person to get help, but the person doesn't want
As
help.
in, you can see their potential, but they don't see it themselves.
And it's so sad, Natasha, seriously. Like, there are some students that are really bright, but they decide to regress. Then there's only so much that we can do.
That's right.
Of course, there are different factors at play, right? But we have really exhausted all efforts to try and say, hey, don't worry about it, we will help you at every step of the way, but no thanks, but no thanks.
Okay.
We had a lot of youth that came from all walks of different backgrounds, and we have different schools, and some of them have never even seen each other in different schools. They have no idea this school exists or this institution exists, and we were like, wait, what? Like, where were you? And when we told them about the program, we guide them. We had our team all became mentors.
Yeah.
And what I did was I was trying to match them as their own people person. And no matter of fact, my team came back and told me, how do you saw this person being my mini me? I was like, yeah, because that's you. When I hired you, and when we realized that that's the potential, and the youth themselves, and they go through their own struggle, and they tell me, hey, Sheila, I want to continue impacting, but then the youth just go away, and they're they don't want this opportunity. And I tell them, you don't have to feel like you need to change everyone, but one day they will come back
to you.
and they will ask for help.
Okay.
And to me, that's how we see. I guess that's the part where a lot of time in our work we feel burnt out because, as a matter of fact, we put in so much.
Because you care.
We care, and then it hurts when it doesn't get back. And it's it's okay. And I remember telling my founder, I was like, it's very tiring because I see so much potential. But the fact is that, and he told me this, he said, the biggest lesson that you will hear is that sometimes for things to grow, it must fall. And the fact is that we were always never ready to see it fall. And that's why like, I agree with what you say, like how we shouldn't create that safe, like the space to make sure we have everything and then we give you everything in a full set. But sometimes it just needs to fall so that we can grow up again.
I think the guy that you met is quite bold. I would never be like, hey, give me a job. Like, okay, that's
I think my parents will smack me.
Well, it's great. Yeah. But that's really passion, purpose, and meaning for you.
Yeah.
I mean, it's encapsulated what Sheila mentioned. And I mean, Sheila, you mentioned this about mentoring. And in fact, both Access and also Sheila, in terms of with the National Youth Council, they're part of our Mentoring SG movement. And we set this up about 2 years ago. I think it's really, really important because what you're trying to do is you're not just trying to create a culture of mentoring, but mentoring that allows for our youth to see what's ahead of them and see people that come before them and have mini Sheilas, for example, or many different ways, and also mini Clarences, for example. So they see and they say, well, this is a particular pathways. And we've been partnering together with RVI and NYC and Access to connect them with industry. So it's not just mentoring, but it's also connecting with people who are in industry, with internships, with apprenticeships, and also eventually with full-time jobs, which is what you have then achieved, you see. That's really important. But Clarence mentioned something earlier on which I wanted to expand on in terms of, for example, for polytechnics and also ITE. So for polytechnics, in the past, because I sit on the MAS board, and we recently launched last year a program called the Polytechnic Talent for Finance Scheme. And traditionally in finance, financial institutions, you would always need to have a degree, for example.
Yeah.
Right? So we've worked with all of these big financial institutions, JP Morgan and others, and we say, well, you take in these interns, or you have apprentice, and you have mid-careers, and after a particular time, about 18 months or so, they are going to provide, after training, on-the-job training, they will get a degree equivalent role. A degree equivalent role, pay, benefits, everything in that financial institution. So I think that's something which is very tangible. We've got those feedback from actually, Clarence and Sheila to say, what can we do to open up these doors?
Yeah.
In ITE, for example, we also have a work-study program. And that's, we've also now, I think this year, opened up to like 5 different pillars. AI, precision
So
engineering,
it's a
and
bit
others.
different and more relevant industries now, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
So if you're in ITE, and I always go down to ITE College Central, right? And we're linking up, for example, aerospace, Boeing, Airbus, right, with our students in ITE in the aerospace sector. And then we say, after you've done this training, go for an internship and then go for work study. So we're not just saying study, but link that to industry and then get a job. So we have all of these different things. And I think going back to what Clarence mentioned, it's now important that you seize that, you take that opportunity, and you just
go for it.
Just go for it. So everything is there. You just have to go for it.
Okay. So when we talk about redefining success, we must also look at the other side of the coin, right? Which is, do we now redefine like failure? What does it mean to fail under this new definition of success?
Social mobility is a big area of focus in Singapore, especially in the last few years. I mean, for me to graduate from university and decide, hey, I really want to double down on social mobility without social capital, I think that's a huge ask, right? So I think the idea is really doubling down, figuring out how do you get there, how do you bring the companies, how do you bring the schools. It was tall. So I would say the starting point was difficult. People might see like, hey, he is on the trajectory of failure because he, Access cannot even get corporates, cannot even get schools.
Because who were you at that? They didn't know who you were at the start. They didn't know Access at all. Okay.
Yes. And I think that's, I wouldn't say failure, but it was a huge challenge. But overcoming it, I think, if you ask most startup founders, I think they would have some sort of story around failure.
But in this new world that we're in, do we redefine what failure means? Or does it not exist? Like, you're on your own path?
I think it's more of reframing your mindset.
Okay.
Right. For me personally, it's about, sure, right now it may seem to be a failure, but what can I do to get out of the rut? Right. I think it's very correlated to well-being. right? It's a lot about, if you think you're a failure, you have to work on yourself. What self-care, for example, what do you define as success? And slowly work towards it, because if no one can help you, I think you owe it to yourself to help yourself. So you really have to work on yourself, take some time off, really figure out, okay, what are the next steps to take us forward.
Sheila?
Yeah, I think for us, it's very interesting because I remember after our program, I was looking at a way to show more of the stories of all the youth, like our journeys. But I was so sick and tired of seeing, the papers, the magazines, and the online articles of success stories. And to me, I was like, I don't want to hear success stories. And a lot of the youth, they
Why,
always
was it
say,
not motivating?
no, it's a bit
Counter to
yeah,
it, right?
very because if you are looking for success, you will go on that journey on your own. But you want to know the failures. Like a lot of the youth today, they don't care how successful you are. What they care is what are the struggles that get you there. What's the failures that you went through, and how do you overcome those failures? And I remember sitting down with my team and saying, what have we done with the youth that went through our program? Like, what's next for them? I said, I think it's successful. I was like, huh? But I want to understand how we're going to move on from here. So the matter of fact is, I just called like 6 of the youth. I just threw an SMS like, hey guys, want to come out and hang out? Let's call it Friday Fries Night. So we run this thing called Friday Fries Night, and we kind of we did a human library element where we invited, participants who wanted to share their stories, but in the angle of their failures. So they must be open to share the failures and share it to the youth. And the youth will come in and choose who are the 2 books they want to read about. Very nicely at a point of time, we have a lot of people who came in. We have like Pretty Please. We had George Goh who didn't get through the elections.
Yeah.
So on the day where he didn't get through, and it was the evening session for him to be part of Friday Fries Night, he turned up and he was like, okay, I failed.
Yeah.
And this is my failure, but I don't see it as a failure. Like how we then redefine. And I think the problem here in society is, how do we engage this kind of conversation? Today in Friday Fries Night, it's been a thing, even because I was part of SFVC, and till today I am still. And all my friends are in the older generation, or I call them the young seniors. And they want to give back to the youth, but they do not know how. And so I told them, hey, I invite you all for Human Library, be a book and share your story. And some of them are engineers, they've been in INDA or like a lot, private sector, public sectors, and they shared their failures. So I didn't even know one of my friends who's an engineer have retrenched 9 times.
Oh, wow.
And when the youth heard the story, like, what
9 times is a lot.
9 times is a lot. What do you do? Like, how do you get back?
Yeah.
And they were so pumped. They're like, okay, this is what life is. We will continue.
That's great.
Yeah. And I think it's not just young seniors, it's also youth. So we even have, a youth that was part of our program whose parents are, lawyers and doctors, and they always aspire her to be a doctor. But she became a nurse, and they were like, no, you cannot be a nurse. Like, this is not what life is. And when she told her story and how she gained her own success through all the failures within, family backgrounds and whatnot, the youth were like, okay, we can relate.
Yeah.
This is more tangible.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah. So I guess redefining failures is also the part of acceptance, right? If you know you fail, you accept it, you wear it on your sleeve and you move on, not you shine upon it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Not stay there and then ruminate
Sulk.
and
Yeah.
like, I gave up, right?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
I found from then that if you were to share that story and you were vulnerable and you were authentic, the youth do relate to that. Yeah, and they say, oh, you're just like me, like anyone else, right? We struggle. And in fact, all of us struggle. I mean, sometimes we cover, we try to put on a front, but in fact, all of us struggle. And if you take that bold step and you be a little bit more vulnerable, and you say, actually, I have fallen before, that opens up the conversation. So I shared about my, academically, I shared that I repeated, I couldn't get to any local university. I tried to do a startup, and it failed, it tanked.
What was the startup?
It's called Marketplace.
Okay.
Yeah, it's basically like Carousel.
Okay.
But then we did not have a phone, right?
Yeah.
So I thought Syria
okay.
I thought Syria, the founder of Carousel,
Yeah,
was like, if the iPhone and Android were on,
Existed,
I
you
would
would have
it
been
would have
the
worked,
pioneer.
Yeah, so just the timing is not the idea.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
right place but wrong time.
Yeah, wrong time. Yeah. And then also, in corporate, I've done well, but I've also been held back. Responsibilities taken away from me before. And so these are just life, right? I mean, life is never linear.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think just sharing those, I have one adage that encourages me, and I've shared this before. It's basically a setback can be a setup. A setback can be a setup. Why? Because a setback can allow you to refocus, reprioritize. It allows you to sometimes be a bit more humble, reevaluate, and it can also refocus your mind to set up to something different. And you may want to pivot to something else. So I don't see failure as failure. I do see it as a setback that is setting me up for something else.
Okay.
And I think applying that lens will be really helpful.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I'm glad you set it up for me on the last question. I want to quickly ask each one of you, like, what is one thing that we need for a mindset shift in redefining success?
Hustle. It's hustle. I mean, in the business that I'm in the social space also, it's a lot of hustling. Sometimes it's over hustling is not good, but I think as long as we have that mindset that we just need to go out and just do it. Alvin always says this, turn up, right?
That's right.
Yeah, maybe I'm stealing it from you.
He stole his answer. He was like, I got to
Actually, I was about to say,
like
he always says turn up.
his tagline though.
He's going to be like, oh, I'll show up.
Challenge really, challenge.
Okay,
But yeah, hustle and just do your best. And if you do need a break, take it. Everyone needs a break.
That's right.
Okay.
Yeah.
Sheila?
I think for me it's resilient. Yeah, you never try, you never know. And you only live once. So it's worth trying.
Okay.
Yeah.
Alvin?
Well, I wanted to say turn up.
Yeah.
But
Someone
then
stole your
Clarence,
answer.
yeah, which is very good because
Signature though.
that means my mentoring has some effect, you know. Yeah, but turning up is it's because I think we take for granted that people do turn up. And you know, Clarence's point earlier on, you can provide all of that, your starfish analogy, right? But will that person turn up?
Yeah.
Will that person turn up to do the work? Will that person turn up on time? You know, on target. That's something that you cannot take for granted. But since you've already taken on that, I learned a new phrase. I was traveling with President Tharman a couple of months ago, and I had a time in the airport with Mrs. Tharman, Janie Togi, and she said, you know, Alvin, we don't use the word rugged enough. And I was like, rugged is such an old school word, you know? Yeah, but she said, actually, ruggedness conveys a certain characteristic. And she's so wise, you know? And it's something that she hopes that our youth and our society will not forget. And what does rugged mean? Ruggedness mean? Well, Sheila touched upon it. It's resilience. It's that adversity will come at us. Adversity will come at us. It's guaranteed. But how do we prepare ourselves as a people? How do we prepare ourselves, our youths, to take on these challenges, be rugged, be resilient, and overcome this? I think that was incredibly wise. So yeah, I've turned up, and I also have rugged.
Okay. So hustle and turn up, resilience and be rugged.
Yes,
okay,
absolutely.
I guess that's like a motivating tagline. You put it on a shirt. We can put it on a
Put it
shirt.
on a poster.
Okay, on that note, thank you very much for
you.
being very candid and open and sharing your own stories. And yeah, now I want to hear from you too. Tell me, what is your definition of success in Singapore and what are you doing to get there? Drop your thoughts into the comment section below. And while you're there, like, subscribe or hit the notification bell to get fresh content from the usual place. Now, if you want to listen to the podcast version of this episode, you can catch our show on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or the ST app. You can also find me on Instagram at theusualplace_net. I'll see you next time at The Usual Place.